An intense media spotlight has fallen on one of Australia's newest communities.
We became the target of the media, basically. Anything that is done, it's reported in a very negative way.
A city in the grips of a perceived youth crime wave searches for someone to blame.
The public, including myself, have linked the Apex gang to these crimes.
Suddenly, we had public enemy number one.
The gang calls itself Apex.
The notorious Apex gang.
And a group of people suddenly found themselves with a target on their back.
Apex becomes synonymous with South Sudanese.
The way they're making us look is, we look crazy on the media. Literally, we look crazy.
Apex has done massive damage to a typical young black man.
They came to Australia to build their future.
Our hope is in our children. We brought them here such that they have good education and also good opportunity.
We're here to make a change. We're here to chase a better life.
Some say this is a case of migration gone wrong.
How dare they think they rule the streets of Melbourne? How dare they have no respect for authority?
But can a single community really be the cause of a spike in youth crime?
There was a vast variety of ethnic backgrounds, including Caucasians, with these offending groups. It's what you'd call a United Nations of offending.
Apex became an easy way to recognise this so-called crime wave that actually didn't reflect reality at all.
They make you the boogeyman as a scapegoat, you know?
There's no such thing as Apex.
This is the story behind the headlines of the Apex gang. For over 30 years, Australia has welcomed immigrants and refugees from one of the world's newest countries, South Sudan. Although South Sudan only gained independence in 2011, people identifying as South Sudanese have been arriving on these shores since the late 80s. For many of these new arrivals, Melbourne would become home.
In the early 90s, that's when a big number of South Sudanese people started to migrate to Australia. I joined my family here in Melbourne. Ever since I arrived here, I've been living here, enjoying a very beautiful life, very happy because majority of my families are here.
Most South Sudanese arrived here after fleeing war and persecution.
We come from a war-ravaged background. The war is in South Sudan has been going on for a very long time and affected so many people's lives.
I'm very lucky. When I arrived in Australia, I was about 22 years old. I've experienced all the hardship in the refugee camp and during the war. So coming to Australia I thought I was given a second chance.
But although they had found sanctuary in Australia, some South Sudanese youth have found life here challenging.
There's definitely problems facing us as South Sudanese youth. The unemployment rate is high.
We have so many young people who graduated from Australian universities. Majority of them are unemployed.
But that's because employers take the mentality of what they've seen in the media, what they've seen in the newspapers. They'll be like, nah, I cannot employ such a person. I cannot have such a person working for me.
Many South Sudanese believe employment and integration into the Australian community have been hampered by a torrent of negativity from websites, television, radio, and social media.
We are a community that is under siege. We have been criminalized by the media.
We became the target of the media, basically. Anything that is done, basically, it's reported in a very negative way.
There is significant hatred which is being generated by a lot of media outlets. Integration itself is being challenged and it is at its deepest lows.
This media storm was first ignited by a spike in violent, often brutal crimes. But behind the headlines lay a startling reality. Out of all the Victorian youth offenders in 2016-17, less than 2% were born in Sudan.
There are issues in my community, I acknowledge that, but the way they are reported I think that it's wrong. The young people who have just gone astray, but with proper support, they will become great members of this society.
This crisis of youth is a massive and it's a big problem for all of us. And we must find ways to resolve it. In every community, there is good, bad, and the ugly. We understand that. So Try to balance all these stories together. Don't just concentrate on the negativity.
With the advent of the digital age, the South Sudanese have become one of the first communities to withstand an onslaught of hostility enabled by websites and social media. But their story isn't new.
It's a historical thing. It's not something that just happened overnight. Every community that came here to Australia, migrated here first, always has problems with integrating.
I tend to do a bit of a research, and I find out that when the Vietnamese first came, they copied it. And I could go a little bit back to when the Italians came. The young people copied it.
It's a phenomenon that seems to follow waves of arrivals of different ethnicities. We've seen it with Greek and Italian migration. The same things, those communities were demonised.
This ongoing scrutiny is taking its toll.
We are indeed in a state of crisis.
And one incident, attributed to a gang called Apex, would be the catalyst for this crisis. The Moomba Festival is Australia's largest free community festival held in central Melbourne.
Moomba is an iconic Melbourne event being held for a number of years. A lot of people and families attend every night and every day.
Moomba Festival is kind of a family day out for everybody. It's good for the children. It's good for the entire family. So people come from all walks of life and congregate in the city to celebrate, share this beautiful diversity.
But in 2016, the Moomba Festival didn't go according to plan.
What happened last year in 2016 was, indeed, is very sad.
Shocking violence at Melbourne's Moomba Festival overnight.
Arrested here in Federation Square involving around 200 youths.
Armed teenagers thought to be from rival gangs.
Chaos erupted during Moomba.
We experienced a large brawl in Federation Square with numerous youth involved, and the pictures of that affray were reported heavily through the media.
Violence erupted in the heart of Melbourne as two rival gangs clashed. Streets filled with chaos.
Two youth gangs were held responsible for the rampage. Islanders 23, a group of mainly New Zealander and Pacific Islander teenagers, and the Apex Gang, a loose affiliation of what appeared to be South Sudanese youth. It was the Apex Gang that captured the media's imagination.
The gang Apex cracked down on the Apex Gang. The gang calls itself Apex.
To the notorious Apex Gang.
The name the Apex Gang has been cropping up in court conversations and cases probably since late 2015. And then it became much more common in early 2016.
Around the time of Moomba 2016 was the first time I heard about the Apex Gang and the word Apex.
Certainly the Moomba riots made Apex a household name, but the majority of the offenders who were arrested and processed for the Moomba riots, only a small percentage of them were from the area of Dandenong or the surrounding areas where this Apex group is supposed to have originated. So
I think what we saw was that the name the Apex Gang started to become associated with the carjackings and the home invasions that had been happening, and suddenly we had public enemy number one.
I honestly thought I would never see the day, but that day has come. Violent home invasions, the new norm. Violent, terrifying carjackings, the new norm. Our police are seriously under the pump with one particular gang in their sights.
every time one of these offences occurred, the first question every reporter asked of me, is it Apex? Is it Apex? There was just this obsession with the media to label them all Apex.
Following the Moomba riots, Apex were kind of presented as your classic youth gang, engaging in violent confrontations with another youth gang. In the months that follow, Apex kind of morphed into a proper organised enterprise as presented by the Herald Sun, the Daily Mail, and so forth. Okay, so there's been a real shift in the way Apex has been represented following the Moomba riots.
It's pretty powerful because what the media shows of what Apex is apparently supposed to be is just a group of these little young African kids. So now you see a bunch of African kids just like walking down the street, you're obviously going to assume that they're part of APAC because that's what the media's like putting on your face and like forcing you to see and stuff.
Whenever you hear the word Apex, obviously an African person will come to your mind. And that is very damaging to South Sudanese and any African person here in Australia. So any African person there become a target.
Apex has done massive damage to a typical young black man.
South Sudanese man Ojulu has lived in Dandenong since he arrived in Australia in 2004. The rise of Apex has impacted his life dramatically.
If you pick up, say, a Herald Sun or you watch a current affair, the image of us young Sudanese on there is a very negative image. We're like the go-to people for everything wrong that's happening in society. They're victimizing us, basically. But to us, we don't have a voice to counteract that because they're the media. We don't own anything that is equivalent to the media. The media can make anybody look like a bad guy. A couple of days ago, I saw this thing on the news. There was a couple of white kids. They went and they robbed a jewelry store. But then when the media was reporting it, they reported it as 3 men. That's what they said. 3 men went and attacked a jewelry store. But then a couple of weeks before that, there was a story of Africans. 3 Sudanese boys that did the same, went and robbed a store. But then they were categorized as a gang. They said a gang of Sudanese youth, which was 3. It was only 3 men. So that's the difference. The media is very slick with the words that they use. They'll say a gang when it comes to us, even if it's just 2 of us. But then everybody else is a group or just men. It's like we're being singled out by the media to push a certain agenda of us being involved in crime, being involved in just things to unsettle the community at large. Something new is always scary for people. So most people don't know how to react to young Sudanese, like a group of young Sudanese men. It would be easier for people to approach them and talk to them, but because of the way the media is portraying it, it's as if they're monsters. You cannot go to them. If you go to them, something's going to happen to you. Because the way they're making us look is, we look crazy on the media. Literally, we look crazy.
At a local barbershop, Ojulu is catching up with other South Sudanese affected by this negative attention.
People say that only the old Africans that are working. No, these are young people, young men working, young men making ends meet. But they never show that in the media. He's a young person. But if he was out there right now, even if he just finished work right now, he goes outside holding a bottle in his hand, that is going to be something negative.
There's no such thing as Apex, you know? As far as I know, they're trying to portray us like with some street gang or something like that. We don't really know where these Apex kids are, like really. There's bad kids everywhere, you know? But the target always the kids who do negative things from Sudanese community, and then they blast it on the media. We don't understand why. We don't know why. That's a good question. Why? Why are you doing this to us? We don't know. We don't know. Instead of blasting at a little thing, oh, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad. How can we make it good? You know? That's for all of us, not just for us Sudanese to figure it out. Because we're living together in this country. You know? So I urge you guys to find it in your heart that to see both sides of the story, the bigger picture, you know? It's not just what you see in the media.
But for many in the media, the Apex gang is newsworthy.
I was at the summit held by the Police Commissioner on Youth Crime,
newspapers were amongst the audience, and they were asked why there is a constant barrage of stories around youth crime. And the answer basically was that they print what sells papers. And I think that told us everything.
My job is to report things as they come through, and I think if there is a large volume of startling incidents, I think we've got a duty to report those. When you've got them committing crimes which are going to attract a lot of immediate public attention, that invariably is going to have a flow-on effect about how they're going to be viewed, and I guess that's where a trend develops.
But was the idea that the Apex gang was behind these crimes true?
The immediate assumption from the media and the wider community that they are, because of the colour of the offender's skin or the description or the type of offending, that it was Apex. We didn't find that. I mean, there was a vast variety of ethnic backgrounds, including Caucasians, with these offending groups. It's what you'd call a United Nations of offending. There was no particular nationality within these groups of offenders.
Could this intense focus on Apex have had unintended consequences?
What we've seen is a transformation of what Apex is. It's transformed into a brand. And if you're a disaffected youth, if you're a marginalised or disenfranchised young person, that brand looks pretty attractive.
For some young people, saying they belong to Apex gang gives them a whole lot of notoriety and esteem that they haven't got anywhere else. And then when you dig deep, you realise they've got no connection except they know them through social media.
What it has done in my community with the young people is now that for you to be associated with that particular brand, Apex, it's a good thing that as a young person, as a teenager, you want to be seen as a part of a pack. And so in real sense, I would probably say it's a myth. But I'm not saying there are no issues. There are no young people from my community who are breaking into the shop. There are. But are they really part of the gang?
Our young people are going through a lot of difficulties. Does not necessarily mean that because they are a gang. No, just simply because they are young people.
Jamie Alex is one man who has experienced those difficulties after arriving in Australia from Sudan in 2002.
I was around 14 years old at the time when I came to Australia, and it was just beautiful, beautiful place, all the garden, the nature, nice, fresh air, like just freedom. I thought life was going to be beautiful. Everything was just going to go the same way it is. And I had motivation just to get out there and then find out what's going on. I had to go to a language school for like 6 months to learn English, and when we learn English, then from language school, they move you to high school. Things got harder for me at high school.
A racist comment from a fellow student would be the catalyst for a series of events that would dramatically alter Jamie's life.
Some guy, he decided to call me the N-word. So I had a fight with him, and I got suspended from school. That's when everything changed for me. We'll go shopping centers with a couple of mates, go shoplift here and there, but it wasn't really a good thing, now looking back to it. A friend of mine started getting into more kind of serious stuff, like robbing people.
In just a few short months, Jamie drifted from petty crime into robbery and violence. Eventually, he was arrested and served time in remand, which would be a turning point for him.
As soon as I left from that place, I'm like, nah, I'm not going back there again. That's it for me. I have to make changes, It wasn't something I'm proud of. It was like really shameful for me to have done something like that.
The key factor that can push young people into this escalating offending, I think, is falling through the cracks of the education system. If the children's education needs are not met in a school and the kid becomes, suspended and excluded, eventually finds there's nowhere for them to go, well, that's a serious failing of the system.
Everyone is capable of change. I believe that, 100%. It's the education behind it, and it's the right people behind it, and people that know how to push you well. Hard work pays off, and if you continue to work hard, if you continue to invest into yourself and into other people, you will see that pay off at some point.
Jamie had hit rock bottom, but he was about to bounce back in a surprising new role. In 2015 and 16, the Apex gang rose to prominence in Melbourne. The name was associated with the rise in home invasions, carjackings, and violent robberies across the city. A media blitz followed the supposed gang, but in the rush to get the stories, one news outlet didn't let the facts get in their way.
The Mail have claimed to have snapped members of the dreaded Apex gang, which is terrorising Melbourne. Note the hoodies, black sneakers and conveniently pixelated faces, which perhaps is because this isn't the Apex gang at all. It's a UK hip-hop band called Section Boys. Easy to make the mistake, of course, they are all black.
A moral panic is when a particular issue comes to preoccupy the public. It's an issue that creates enormous fear. And this is what we're seeing with Apex and the response to Apex and the amount of media attention that Apex has acquired.
I think we saw a similar situation in Adelaide in the late 2000s. We saw a phenomenon where there was a so-called Gang of 49.
So this was an Indigenous group. There was a number of news stories that focused on the mayhem inflicted by this group.
The Gang of 49...
They have got all sorts of hideous backgrounds.
Surely this gang is a mob of terrorists. This is about pure evil.
So the thing is, they didn't exist, okay? This was a media-made creation. It's completely concocted by the media.
The press created as a headline, Gang of 49, just simply made it up.
There is no formal gang structure to the Gang of 49. There's no formal structure or hierarchy. So we would say that the Gang of 49 doesn't exist.
Whenever you bring the kind of issue of gangs into the piece, it's a recognisable issue. It's easy to understand. It's easy to simplify.
This became a phenomenon that put fear right throughout the community and gave the sense that the community was under siege, that there was a gang, that the risk of violent victimisation was increasing, which was simply not true. So I think to some extent, this Apex phenomenon is similar.
Amongst this climate of fear now associated with Apex, police in Melton have called a meeting to address the anxieties of the community. In the crowd are members of anti-refugee group True Blue Crew. For them, one community is to blame.
Sadly, it does seem to be the Sudanese often, doesn't it? Like, you've got to call a spade on it, you know what I mean? I wish it wasn't the fact either. They've come here for a better life, but unfortunately not all of them have come for that reason.
The purpose of the evening is to provide you, the community, with some safety information. There'll be some discussion regarding community concerns and the general fear in the community, which we acknowledge.
I was home invaded a few months ago, and I know how it feels. You'd rather not be at home. Yeah. What saved me was my double lock on my front door. 4 people tried to break down my front door, and within 5 minutes of calling 000, the police were there.
I'll just tell you that I'm the mother of a very young boy that was assaulted on his bicycle in the middle of the day, robbed and assaulted, going down to his local milk bar.
I don't want to see my wife get raped or my children get bashed, you know. What do? I'm happy to hand my money, everything, but I want my family to be safe, as simple as that.
It doesn't take long for some in the crowd to point the finger at those they hold responsible for the crimes.
I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an article that's been reported on iWatch about that particular community being, and you
Who
say...
are you talking about?
You say
this
is
Well,
they don't say they're white, they don't say Asian either, so why should they, you know what I mean? You just want them to come out and say that they're Sudanese. That's what you're wanting, but there's other people committing crimes.
We've got to recognise that. We can't get an integration solution unless we recognise what part of the community is committing these crimes.
Every part of the community, you don't just blame the Sudanese, and that's what you are asking.
Maybe not is a racial war, right? We want to try and be cohesive, include these people as best we can. Not all African kids are bad kids. They are good kids. A lot of those kids are great kids. And the community leaders in relation to the African community are as concerned about the offending within their community as what we are.
There has been some unhelpful commentary on social media in relation to Sudanese being at fault and just send them back.
There's definitely a lot of fear within the community. I think a lot of it is through social media and also through mainstream media. My issue is that as soon as there is a robbery, straight away people automatically presume that it's Sudanese.
There is a part of the community that is also blaming them for everything, even though, you know, there's a large number of them that are great kids that go about their business, minding their own business, and our fear is that they will become targets.
The people of Melton are working with the law, but police still have concerns about groups promoting racial violence.
A lot of people are taking an almost vigilante attitude to these aggravated burglaries and carjacking, carrying weapons. But if anyone is arming themselves or preparing themselves, in the likelihood of a confrontation, they're stepping on dangerous territory.
White vigilante groups now have a reason to attack African youths because of what the media is saying. You keep feeding them this propaganda, you keep feeding them this propaganda, eventually they're going to react to it.
In central Melbourne, one organisation, claiming to be defenders of Australian culture, believe the battle lines are drawn and the enemy is clear.
Our men and women, our children, they don't feel safe in their own communities anymore. Plain and simple, you know? Where 20 years ago there was a sense of safety in your community. That's all gone.
Soldiers of Odin was founded in Finland by Mika Ranta, a self-declared neo-Nazi. The Australian group deny supporting fascism and see themselves as patriots.
It's not Caucasian kids the majority of the time that are committing these carjackings, home invasions and so on. Look at the news, look at what we are hearing every day of the week. The one contributing factor is that they all seem to be Sudanese Somalian. We've been told that this is basically Apex turf. This is their area in the city.
Apex, I don't know a great deal about them, only from what we see on TV, on the reports and that. It seems to be predominantly a lot of young, I don't know if they're all Sudanese or I don't know exactly where they're from, but it seems to be the same sort of colour.
Yesterday, for example, in Taylor's Lakes, is it just a coincidence that the person with the gun that robbed the service station was Sudanese Somalian? We don't think so. We're just out patrolling tonight, just keeping an eye on what we see as our city. Maybe restore a bit of that sense of safety back to our fellow Australians.
I haven't seen any good Sudanese stories. I don't see any of them coming out condemning what their fellow people are doing. I mean, I'd like to hear a good story. I haven't seen it. Here we go.
What's that? What do they say?
Fuck off racists.
Fascists get off our streets.
That's what we cop for doing what we do.
Despite singling out the South Sudanese as the cause of Melbourne's problems, the soldiers of Odin feel they are the ones being vilified.
Unfortunately, a lot of the time, the research isn't done to find out what our true intentions and agenda are. It's easier to sensationalise a group of people, and that sells the story that they want to sell, you know.
While the soldiers of Odin claim they are misunderstood, they haven't yet been the focus of a speech in federal parliament, unlike the Apex gang.
It is time for the National Anti-Gang Squad to take on the new gang, which many of you may have heard of, and that's the Apex gang based in Melbourne. They are causing absolute fear in the streets of Melbourne. How dare they think they rule the streets of Melbourne? How dare they have no respect for authority? How dare they destroy the good times families were planned to have on Saturday night in Melbourne? Time to act and time to act now.
What I saw with the Apex gang greatly concerned me when we had that incident in Moomba, that the gang was pretty much going unchecked and would actually expand and get more violent and more aggressive, which is precisely what has occurred.
During a parliamentary inquiry into migrant settlement outcomes, Jason Wood focused on the now politically charged issue of migrant gang-related crime. Some thought the real focus was on only one group.
The parliamentary inquiry said that it's looking at issues around settlement, but fundamentally, I think we all know that the agenda seems to have taken a focus on African communities, and particularly the South Sudanese, and that it appears that this is about assessing whether the African community has integrated into Australia. Completely unfair, unwarranted, and out of proportion to the concern that exists.
One of the things I've explained to the committee members is there has been a lot of fear in this community. Is it an actual reality that there is migrant or gang crime out in this area?
Home invasion has become a very, very worrisome crime pattern in the southeast and particularly in the city of Casey.
Is there a feeling, an actual reality that a lot of these crimes have actually been committed by migrant gangs? And obviously the Apex gang, I believe, falls in the city of Casey, is that correct?
Yes, the information we're getting about the perpetrators from both police and the media do suggest they are migrant gangs.
And is that the main gang in the area will it be the Apex gang we've spoken?
As far as I'm aware, yes.
Over the last 12 months, we've seen, if you believe it, in the media, hundreds of people are Apex offenders, but it's not the case. They're only a small group, and those that were Apex originally, we've locked them all up.
In central Melbourne, South Sudanese leaders are so concerned by the damage done by the reporting of Apex, they are seeking the advice of prominent social justice campaigner Tim Costello.
It is important for South Sudanese living in Australia to rally together, work together as a community. If we work together, it will help us to tackle some of the issues that are affecting young people in the community here.
We don't feel that we belong because the way the media project us the issue of young people now, the media say South Sudanese have done this, South Sudanese have done that. So there is an issue, and I don't know how we can resolve this issue. We feel excluded.
Yeah.
We feel excluded.
So every immigrant group to Australia in the last 60 years has felt like you're feeling. Latvians and Estonians first in the 50s, then Greeks, then Italians. They all felt, and we did, the white Australians who were here did exactly the same thing to all of those groups. And now, over time, they actually feel that they're Greek Australian, they're Italian Australian. I am absolutely convinced that will be your experience too. But right at the moment, it's incredibly painful and unfair, but it's actually how, over time, it works.
I think if there is one thing that our community did not do well is to publicize what we do. That silence means to the public that the community are not doing anything. There are lots and tons of things that are happening in the community now, but they go unreported. But as a person from that community myself, I can tell you there's quite a lot that is happening in terms of helping these young people in trouble.
In Canterbury, 10 kilometres east of the Melbourne CBD, Gary Holloway is also concerned about the future of South Sudanese youth, but for different reasons. His jewellery stores have been robbed twice by youths with South Sudanese backgrounds.
Unfortunately, there's going to be enormous racial profiling for all dark-skinned people because it's clear and apparent that some of those kids are getting the entire South Sudanese community and, in fact, all of the black-skinned people a very, very bad reputation. My staff, the idea of just simply seeing a black person now sends them into shock and horror.
But despite the stress he and his staff have suffered, Gary also understands how this must be affecting the South Sudanese community.
I really think that Australia has done a fantastic job of integrating people from all sorts of countries. We've had people from war-torn countries before, and it's taken maybe 10, maybe 20 years in some cases to properly integrate those races and those people. It's going to be harder for these people because they're so easily identified. And I really feel for the African communities in general. Their communities, they're going to go through hell. They must already be going through hell.
I don't think there will be anybody from the South Sudanese community who would not acknowledge that there is no issue. There is an issue. The problem now comes in is when my community are targeted in a way that these issues become a South Sudanese issue. That's where the problem comes in.
So the actual threat is there, the threat from some small group of young people behaving in absolutely unconscionable ways and, you know, committing violent offences, but the scale of the problem is nowhere near what people think it is. Actually, the numbers of South Sudanese young people involved in these offending is small. The rate of offending by South Sudanese people is small. The rate of offending by Anglo, white, Australian-born young people is much higher than South Sudanese offending.
In 2016, South Sudanese youth made up only 8% of Victorian young offenders committing home invasions. Australian-born youth accounted for almost 80%.
It's an Australian issue, it's not a South Sudanese issue. If the ways that we need to deal with it, we need to look at it as an Australian issue and tackle it from that sense.
Headlines create this sense that it's a racialised problem, that it's a South Sudanese problem, when it's simply not. It's nothing to do with ethnicity. It's much more about youth.
Fearful of spiralling youth crime, the question that the police and community now face is how they can change perceptions and reality. In the suburbs of Melbourne, the South Sudanese community is battling against a barrage of negative media and perceptions linking them to the notorious Apex gang.
I think it would be fair to say that the Apex gang became a byword for young offenders from the South Sudanese community in a lot of people's minds.
But criticism of the South Sudanese community started long before the rise of Apex.
Immigration Minister Kevin Andrews says he won't be apologising over his comments on African refugees. Migrant community leaders have accused him of creating race tension by saying that Sudanese arrivals have trouble assimilating.
The media attention started way back in 2007. Kevin Andrews came out specifically and said African young people, and in particular South Sudanese, are finding it hard to integrate, to assimilate in Australia. And that, for me, was the beginning of understanding how things work in Australia.
I'm not proposing to apologise for saying what people are concerned about.
I attribute everything happening now to as far as then. And we became the target of the media, basically. Anything that is done, basically, it's reported in a very negative way. Again, I want to emphasize that it's not because there are no issues in our community. There are issues in our community, but I have a problem on how those issues are reported.
Our hope is in our children. So we wanted to invest in our children. And we brought them here such that they have good education, good training, and also good opportunity. But when we see a small group now kind of slipping, through the gaps, it's too devastating for us and for the community.
Having recognised that some of their youth are heading in the wrong direction, many in the South Sudanese community are determined to do something to change it. At the inquiry, Gum Mamour wants to explain to Jason Wood the complexities that youth like him face in Australia.
Coming from a refugee camp and then coming here, settling in was a little bit difficult. Learning the language and getting to the schools and the new environment and, let's say, something as simple as electricity and houses and cars and everything. There's a lot of things that just entwine and come together. The whole culture is completely different. Like how you think and how you act and how your beliefs and everything else is completely different.
Were you involved in any gang activity?
Probably wouldn't say I was involved in gangs, but when I came here, I was 12 years old.
Yeah.
And I couldn't speak English.
Gum was placed in high school after only 4 months of English language learning. For some at the inquiry, this is the first time they've heard the difficulties young South Sudanese face.
Me not being able to express myself how I want to, teachers not understanding me, and my behavioral issues that I had from the culture that I come from and trying to fit in here. There was a whole range of things that I just couldn't control. And I couldn't find myself, and I couldn't understand myself because my mom she didn't understand the Australian way of life. And like, I couldn't really relate to it because I was having Australian issues. And I go to school and school couldn't understand where I come from, but I just couldn't communicate and I couldn't relate. It's like, if someone disrespects you, I don't know how to be smart back. I would always try to retaliate and fight. And I know a lot of kids are going through that. They need full attention from prep to primary school to high school. Those kids that don't like school as much don't just get kicked out. And when they get kicked out, where are they going to end up? From that point on, it's very, very hard to help them. The best way is to keep those kids in schools, because when they get out of schools, that's when they're already having issues and problems in school, and when they get kicked out, or when they decide to not come to school anymore, they get into more trouble.
For Jason Wood, Gum's testimony has been illuminating.
When I hear people like Gum, it just was like a lightning bolt that out there, it's all about early intervention. It's all about the Africans becoming the youth leaders. You're getting these young Sudanese engaged in TAFE courses in university, and they're just desperate to get involved in the community and get jobs. But you could also sense that frustration where they're not being given that opportunity. And that's something I personally want to change, and we need to change, because these young Sudanese who are looking for work, they'll be the future leaders.
One of those potential young leaders is Jamie Alex. He's been helped on his way by Selba Luca, a youth worker.
Jamie Alex was a very difficult young man who was going through a lot. I actually helped him, and he became a better person.
So I told about what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to just restart the button and do something good.
As part of a community that has been accused of inaction on the issue of youth crime, tonight, Jamie is breaking new ground. He is launching a basketball club called the Black Rhinos, which aims to engage with local youth.
Now, the founder of the Black Rhinos, Jamie Alex, come forward.
When young guys come and join Black Rhino right now, they feel like they belong to a group, a team, you know, play together and have fun together. It takes them out of like hanging in the street or something like that. So when they come there, they feel good, and then they actually invite a couple of their friends, and we tell them, yeah, put the word out there, there's something like that happening, positive, and it's positive for all of us, positive for your body, come and join.
Yeah, we're hoping we get more funding because we got more kids coming through now, you know. We got like 60-something kids registered, and we have to close it at 50 because we kind of committed all of them, you know. And that's why we're really hoping to get more funding from those guys, you know, so we can help all these kids and get more, because I'm sure there's more gonna come. And we can't just shut down and like tell them, nah, we can't have you.
Most of these young guys just want to fit into something. It doesn't matter what it is, if it's negative or positive, but when they found it's something like basketball, they will turn to positive.
Today, the Black Rhinos are being presented with their uniforms for the first time.
They haven't seen the uniform yet. Yeah, so they're going to be excited. It's beautiful gray uniform with a bit of colors of Africa and the rhinos there. So they said gray looks good on black people. So, so we went with that theme. Let's see what happens.
You feel like you're home, yeah? Feel like representing something, you know, standing for something.
Black Rhino, man. All the way up, man.
Yeah. Huh? Hey, you want to take a photo?
No, I'd like to take a picture without it.
Ready?
All these young people, they have a sense of belonging.
Oh, we gotta go. Let's go up there.
History. We're about to make history, my friend. So let's go and do it. You know? With a smile on, man.
We're trying to show to them little kids that it's not too late to get help, because I've been walking in that shoes before, and look at me, and I've been changing, so don't feel afraid.
Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome the Black Rhinos.
Among the guests is jewellery store owner Gary Holloway.
His jewellery shop has been robbed 2 or 3 times. And at the time, they were saying that these young people should be sent home where they belong. And Gary said that he wanted rehabilitation. He believes in rehabilitation.
It's so good to see that they've actually got the possibility of changing their life, of doing something productive. I'm going to donate $5,000 from my business to sell that. I'm not into forgiveness, I'm into finding solutions.
I think Black Rhinos is actually giving an answer to the dream that Gary Holloway has, rehabilitation. If you give someone an opportunity, that there is an opportunity for basketball, but you have to behave this way, and they abide to those rules, that person can become better, just like what Jamie has done.
1 year after the Moomba riots of 2016, which had been largely blamed on the supposed Apex gang, Victorian police are preparing for the 2017 event. But this time, they're doing it with the help of South Sudanese community leaders.
Intelligence we've been gaining through the day, we do have large numbers of young people coming in. Once again, I thank you for your time. It's appreciated. You're doing it in your own time. Your family's at home. So we really thank you for that. And let's hopefully have a good night and we meet some great young people.
We can't do our work just by ourselves. We need the community to support us. We had issues with, the large groups of the African youth coming into town, but the community leaders are focused and here to support us.
So, Cot, can you deploy your guys? We've got about 30 young people up at the State Library already. Yeah. So if you can head up there first and you'll find there'll be police up there already, but that will start the ball rolling.
Kot Manoa and a group of other South Sudanese community leaders are working together with the police to help diffuse any potential tension.
We hear a lot of criticism in the media, and some of the criticism centers around leaders are not doing anything, parents, are not doing anything. The reality is that a lot of those commentary is really negative and not right. As a leader, for example, sometimes I do more voluntary unpaid work than what I do for my employee in 38-hour, 40-hour paid work. Tonight, there'll be a lot of young people out there, so I think if we split 6-6, it's not going to be enough. Do you all agree with me? So better we stay together. All we want to do is engage with them. If there is large group, let us try to do our best. So let's keep moving to State Library. Let's go.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Moomba 2017. Fireworks this evening will be happening at 9:30. For entrance into the park, it is your next left out.
The young people come in a few groups or significant large groups of 100, 150, probably more. And when the police officers come, they'll come and maintain a presence, no communication. It is only when we come in that we restore that sense, because we come from a cultural setting whereby we have hierarchy of respect. So a younger boy would always respect an elder or a senior person of that particular community. So we quickly come and diffuse the situation. Here we are at the Federation Square at the moment. Where are you? All right, we're coming down. Okay, bye.
They went up to the Melbourne Central Railway Station, they went into Fed Square, and there they were engaging with young African youth, encouraging them to go home, because a lot of young people come into town, and I have no doubt that Mum and Dad didn't know where they were at that time.
We just want to interact with young people and get to understand, why they are on the street, and, staying out that late, a lot of them obviously relatively young. When are you going to sleep? Huh? Not sure. We want to connect with them you know, trying to remind them to do the right thing and avoid them getting into trouble.
There's been no blues or anything, so that's been the good news. So, yeah.
For the police, the actions of Cott and his team have made a significant difference.
Looking at the crime stats from compared to last year to this year, the reported crime was halved, which was fantastic news. So working with the community leaders enabled us to have a pretty good night on this year at Moomba.
I know Australian people are very good people, and we are very grateful for the opportunities also availed to us here in Australia. Eventually, this thing will come to an end.
We are the first generation to grow up here in Australia. We're here to make a change. We're here to chase a better life.
Historically, whenever there is a new refugee or migrant community into Australia, there is always a sense of who are they, will they settle, will they belong?
This is something that we kind of forget. We forget that each successive generation or new wave of migration from a particular country or area comes to be blamed for the social ills of the country.
This is a phenomenon, and we should feel reassured that we can deal with this as a community, that we can welcome new people into the community and not have to feel this sense of threat.
And I believe we will be one people, and we will work together and contribute together toward the prosperity of this country called Australia.